So, if you've never mixed your music in Atmos, or any surround sound format, the thought of it can be rather daunting. I mean, what do you do with all of these speakers? Now, I've done some work in surround sound, and it's really not daunting at all. So today I want to give you guys one rule not to break, and then a couple of different ways to think about approaching a mix in surround or Dolby Atmos. So let's get cracking. So when it comes to doing a mix in Atmos, it's really a whole new world for us musicians. Now, of course, at the end of the day, you can do anything you want, but the one rule you don't want to break is this. Whatever you do in your Atmos mix still needs to make sense for the song you're working on. Now, yes, of course, you could mix a song and you could have the vocals coming out of the ceiling, you could have the kick drum coming out of the one rear speaker, the snare out of the other, the rest of the drums up front, and you could have the bass and guitar spinning around the room like they're on PCP. You could do that, but it wouldn't make any sense, and it would be really hard to listen to that mix. This is going to be one area when it comes to mixing in Atmos we need to be careful of. We don't want our mixes to sound gimmicky or overdone. So here's the first way you can think about approaching an Atmos mix. Think of your front speakers as your meat and potatoes, and then think about all the other speakers more like spices or seasoning. For some songs, it's going to make perfect sense to utilize all of the speakers and make the most out of them. And for other songs, it's going to make little to no sense to heavily use them. Alright, so let me give you a couple of quick examples of this. Okay, so let's say you're watching a movie and there's two people sitting in the living room having a conversation. Now, obviously the dialogue's going to come out of the center channel speaker, right? Again, that makes sense. But now what about all the other speakers? Now, there's going to be something coming out of those speakers, but if it's a quiet living room, it's going to be very, very little. It might just be a little bit of ambience, maybe a little bit of room tone. Or if the same conversation was happening in a coffee shop. Again, there's going to be more coming out of the surrounds because now there's people moving around, there's people making coffee. So naturally, there's going to be more stuff happening in the other speakers. So now let's say we've recorded a song and it's just a simple acoustic guitar and a vocal. Let's say you've either double tracked or stereo mic'd the acoustic guitar. So obviously, panning the guitar left and right is going to make sense. Having the vocal come out of the center is going to make sense. So now what about all the other speakers? Well, just like the movie scene I was talking about, what's going to make sense for the song? What sort of space do you want to put this song in? This is no different than a stereo mix. Do we want the song to sound like it was recorded in a small room, or do we want it to sound like it was recorded in a giant cathedral? And is it a song that's strung heavily, maybe a little more aggressive, or is it like a delicate finger-picked song? That right there can help us determine how wide do we want to spread these guitars out? How much ambience do we want to put in the other speakers? Does it need to be wide with a lot of ambience, or does it need to be more narrow with just the faintest amount of ambience? Again, it's going to depend on the song. Alright, so let's do a complete 180 on this one, and pretend now you're watching an action film. If you're watching a super intense scene in an action film, I mean, sound's going to be coming out of all the speakers. It's going to be coming from all over the place. It's just going to be crazy. So if you've got like a rock or a metal song or like an EDM song and there's a bajillion things going on and you want this song to sound humongous, it's going to make a lot more sense to more heavily utilize all these speakers you have at your disposal. And again, how you utilize all these other speakers, it's going to depend on what makes the most sense for the song that you're working on. Alright, and the last thing to think about when approaching an Atmos mix is how do you add contrast to the song? How do you get it to contract and expand? Now this is stuff we can already do in a stereo mix, it's just when we're mixing in Atmos, we can make it a lot more apparent if we choose to. So again, maybe we got like a hard rock or metal song. So what we could do as an example is maybe in the verses we have the guitars tucked in a little bit. So maybe they're on the left and the right, but they're just slightly tickling the wide speakers. Now let's say there's like a 1-bar guitar riff before the chorus. So maybe you take that 1-bar guitar riff, you just put it through one speaker, maybe put a telephone effect on it, make it sound really small, and then have the chorus explode. So instead of the guitars being in the left and the right and just slightly hitting the wide speakers, well maybe now they're more coming out of the wide speakers. And again, when it gets back to the verse, you can pull it back in again. So just little things like that can really help your song feel alive because it can breathe, it can expand and contract. And again, how you utilize that and how you do that would depend on the song or the part of the song. Again, no different than a stereo mix. Some things in a stereo mix we need to be really big and really loud. Other things need to be really quiet and really small. It's contrast. I mean, if everything in the mix is big and loud, then nothing in the mix is big and loud. But again, when it comes to mixing in Atmos, because we don't have to cram everything into 2 little speakers, we can really expand upon this and really make it noticeable. Alright, so those are my quick tips to help you guys get started mixing in Atmos. Hopefully you found them useful, and if you have any comments or questions, again, as always, just leave them down below. And as always, thanks again for watching. I've been Mr. Jeff, and I'll see you guys in the next one, so take it easy.